Hi, everybody. Peter Larson here. We're about to start. Let a few minutes, let people come in. See, people are moving in. Still only 7:29, so we still have a few more minutes, and people are streaming in for the webinar tonight. It's Grafton. It's a very nice summer evening. It's kind of a bit of a crime to be indoors doing a webinar when the weather's like this, but here we are. I'll wait one more minute. All right. It's 7:31. We promised to start at 7:30, so let's do that. Thanks very much. Hi, everybody. Thanks for agreeing to spend summer evening with us, or if you're out west for a late afternoon. So thank you very much. My name is Peter Larson. I'm the chair of a small research and education organization called the Ottawa Forum on Israel-Palestine. We're actually here in Ottawa, and I'm happy to say, as of this week, we've always been given a land acknowledgement, but as of this week, we have asked for and got permission from Kitigan to continue to do our work on recognizing their traditional territory. So that makes me happy. Before I start, I just wanted to say that my views on the Israel-Palestine question have evolved quite a bit over time, and I think that's relevant to you. I started out by being very pro-Israel. I loved Exodus, both the movie and the book, and I saw the creation of Israel as an almost miraculous story in which the Jews finally got the protection and safety they deserved. Oh, I meant to say, excuse me, Grafton. I'm here with my colleague Grafton Ross, who is the vice chair of OFIP. Grafton will be mostly working in the background here, handling questions for you. So I depend on Grafton to keep us on track. He'll be putting pieces up on the chat as appropriate. So Grafton, thank you.
You're welcome. Well, so I'll just fade into the background then, and
hide in the background there.
Okay.
I should have mentioned that before. So thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Grafton.
We'll see you later.
Yeah. Okay. So as I said, I started off being very biased in favor of Israel. Then, as things evolved, I started to become increasingly critical, particularly after 1967, of Israel's brutal policies towards the Palestinians. And I had evolved from being a full-blown supporter of Zionism to what we call liberal Zionism. That is, I agreed with the idea of Israel as a Jewish state, but didn't like what it was doing. And then I started to travel there. I took many trips, took many Canadians with me. And after speaking to many people, Israelis, Palestinians, and others, I gradually come to have a more critical view of Israel itself. I was shocked by the violations of human rights, the house demolitions, the imprisonment of children, the brutality at the checkpoints, and so on. And I came to believe that the original idea of creating a Jewish state, creating a highly militarized state for Jews in the middle of the Muslim world, was not going to be a way to protect Jews. Now, some people think that I have become and will argue that I'm pro-Palestinian. I don't see myself that way. I don't think the Palestinians are any smarter or nicer or kinder to their children than anybody else. And by the same token, I don't feel that I'm anti-Semitic in any way. I don't feel that Jews, or Israeli Jews, have anything that makes them any less people than others. But But I do have a very strong bias in favor of human rights and democracy and international law. And I think in the current circumstances, it's the Palestinians who most need support in this manner. So if you want to discuss later on in the Q&A how I evolved over time, I'm happy to do that. My plan for this evening is to talk for about 25 or 30 minutes. Then I'll open the floor to questions or disagreements. You'll be able to either raise your hand and speak and raise a question that way, kind of like cross-country checkup, or you can write your questions in the Q and answer box, which is down at the bottom, and Grafton will handle that. I am very serious that I want questions, real questions, questions that challenge or disagreements. If you end up agreeing with everything I say tonight, then I'm sorry that you've wasted your time and I've wasted mine. I really hope there are some people who have different views and raise challenging points of view and question, and that's how we'll all learn going forward. So I'm going to start off by sharing my screen. Grafton, can you confirm that you can see the screen okay? Grafton, can you see the screen?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's
Thank
good.
you.
All right, okay. So this is an open conversation tonight about Israel, Gaza, and Hamas. And of course, what really is in everybody's mind is this, first of all, this attack that took place on October 7th, in which somewhere around 1,500 Palestinian militants broke out of Gaza. They attacked Israeli military positions. They killed at least 350 Israeli military people, and another 800 Israeli civilians were killed. And we'll talk a bit about the circumstances, what we know of the circumstances of that. 250 hostages were taken back to Gaza, and Israel and the world was shocked. And then, of course, we have, in the last 7, now going on 8 months, Israel has been carrying out this terrific and plausibly genocidal attack on Gaza. So my objectives for tonight are why Gaza has always been a problem for Israel, who is Hamas, where does it come from, what's the backstory, and what's the situation as of today, and what the future might hold. I'll speak for about 35 minutes, and afterwards we'll get into Q&A, and I hope that will be rich as well. So on October 7th, most of us were surprised, including many Israelis. But at the same time, I wasn't really surprised. I wasn't surprised because I have been to Gaza several times and I've seen the situation there. So I kind of can say I was totally surprised on that date, and I was surprised about exactly what happened, but I wasn't surprised that something was going to happen. And the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, said that the attack by Hamas on October 7th didn't happen in a vacuum. Now, what does he mean by that? Well, we have to go back in history, and we have to go back, you can go back a long ways in history. I'm arbitrarily saying, let's just go back to 1940, 45, although this issue did start earlier, and in question and answer, we can talk more about that if you want. But in the Second World War, of course, we all know that 6 million Jews were murdered by the Nazis. And in the post-World War II situation, there was a question about what to do with the Jewish survivors. We in Canada and in the West generally, we felt sorry, we felt ashamed. But at the same time, unfortunately, we didn't want Jews here. We'll all remember that story about one is too many. And so Canada embraced the idea, the Zionist idea, of giving European Jews a part of Palestine to make a state. And that was Lester Pearson, who was our foreign affairs minister at the time, who was promoting this at the United Nations. So in 1947, then the UN proposed to create a new Jewish state by carving up Palestine. Now, on the map on the left-hand side, once again, for those of you who are well-versed in this, I'm sorry this is going to be repetition, but perhaps for those who are not so well-versed, it would be helpful to go over it. We see here the map, that orange and yellow map together is what was called Mandate Palestine, under the British Mandate as a result of the First World War. On the left-hand side, there's the Mediterranean River, Mediterranean Sea, and on the right here is the Jordan River, and you will all have heard recently that cry, from the river to the sea. That's what this means, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. A cry, by the way, that is used both by the Likud, the major Jewish Israeli party, as well as by the Palestinians. The UN proposed to divide that area up along the lines you see in the map. The beige area was to be the new Jewish state, and the yellow area was to be the new Arab state. At the time, there were about 500,000 recently arrived European Jewish refugees who were living in Palestine. They'd come in the 20s and 30s, so they weren't all refugees, but they were fleeing their terrible situation in Eastern Europe. But there was also at the same time about 1 million Palestinian Arabs living there who'd been living there for some time. And so this posed a problem, because to create a Jewish state where the Jews were only 30% of the population, they had to find some way to make a Jewish majority. And there were really a limited number of options to do that. One, of course, would have been a Rwanda kind of thing, is to kill off all the Palestinians. That was not done. Another is to try to get more Jewish immigrants to come, and efforts were made to do that, but that would take some time. And the third option was the one that the Zionists then adopted, was to encourage the Palestinians to leave. And there were huge pressures on Palestinians, including some massacres, and over 700,000 Palestinians fled the area to then leaving Jews in a majority in the Jewish state. The Palestinians resisted, of course, but they were overwhelmed, and we can talk about why they were so overwhelmed. But in May 48, so 6 months later, Israel declared independence. By then, nearly half of the Palestinians had been expelled. The Arab countries attacked, but they were too weak and didn't really have any, were not consequential in their attack. And so Israel was established. This period, the Palestinians call the Nakba. You've probably all heard this word before. The Nakba refers, it's Arabic for catastrophe. It took place between November 1947, which was when the UN vote took place, and August 1948. You see in the map, it was chaos. This is, again, the map of historic Palestine. You can see the arrows show people fleeing basically in all directions. They were scared. There were massacres. So some people, if people had relatives in Beirut, for example, or relatives in Jordan or relatives in Egypt, they would flee as best they could in boats, sometimes on foot, sometimes on trucks. The West largely looked the other way when this happened. Now, there are lots of, we can get into reasons about why the West looked the other way. You could say today they're kind of looking the other way, mostly what's happening in Gaza. But in any event, this took place, and many of those refugees fled to Gaza. They fled also to the West Bank and the other countries, but Gaza became the largest concentration of Palestinian refugees. And this is Gaza down here in the bottom left-hand corner. Oops. There. This area over here was to be part of the new Arab state. And so the people fled to that area down there. Israel then proceeded to, in the depopulation of the area, it destroyed over 500 Palestinian villages. Why? So that the refugees would not return. And this is why many Palestinians today think of what's happening in Gaza, the destruction of the houses, as a repeat of the Nakba in 1947-48. So since 48, in successive wars, Israel has continued to take more and more property and more terrain and expel more and more Palestinians. So in this, many of you will recognize this series of 4 maps. On the left-hand side, 1947, this was still under British mandate to Palestine. And the white areas are areas where European Jews had bought land. They purchased land mostly from absentee landowners here. And then you see the UN proposal to divide, which is the second map, more or less correlates to where the major Jewish centers of population were. That was the petition plan in 1947. Of course, the Palestinians were not happy that good part of their land was being offered to European settlers. They resisted, the Arabs resisted, and in the ensuing fighting, Israel ended up taking over much more land. And so this is what was left. This is more or less the boundaries that Canada recognizes as being Israel today, with two parts, Gaza down here. This map says Palestine here, although in 1949, that was actually under Jordanian control. And then we have the current situation here where, because of the settlements and the sequels of the Oslo Accords, the Palestinians are being squeezed into less and less territory. And of course, as we know in Gaza, they're being squeezed into less and less territory. The Palestinians have always been much weaker militarily, but they've never given up trying to get their land back. They've resisted however they could, the guerrilla resistance. They snuck back across the borders and tried to attack Israeli sites. Of course, they're famously known for using terrorism, particularly in the Second Intifada, the blowing up the buses and so on. The Palestinians made repeated appeals to the UN and to the international community, and they got votes at the UN, but those votes had no consequence. They've demonstrated, they boycotted, many of you will be aware of the BDS campaign, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign against Israel. But frankly, none of it's really worked. To no avail. Israel is far too strong. And furthermore, it has the support of Western countries, including Canada. The most important support, of course, we've seen in the last little while is from the United States, but Israel has had general Western support. The Palestinians have been organized in various Palestinian resistance organizations. You'll remember Yasser Arafat, who was the head of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which was kind of an umbrella of various resistance groups. He was also the chair of Fatah, the third group mentioned there, which is one of the Palestinian political parties. The Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine was another political party. Islamic Jihad is another, and Hamas. So I'm gradually trying to come to you to explain, first of all, why Gaza is important, and then why Hamas is key in all this. Now, what is Hamas? Well, first of all, the name, I can't say it in Arabic, but it means the Islamic Resistance Movement, HMS. So it goes by its initials, kind of like the NDP. Well, I don't mean to say it's like the NDP, but we refer to it in the same way by its initials. It's a political party. It was founded in 1987, and it's based on very strict religious principles. And its objective, stated clearly, is to recover all of Palestine, including all of modern-day Israel, and to establish a new state based on Islamic principles. It has a political wing and a military wing, kind of like Sinn Féin did in Ireland, and actually like the African National Congress also had a political wing and a military wing. During the Second Intifada, I told you, it became reviled in the West for its use of terrorism, but that really hasn't happened in the last 40 years. And in fact, in 2006, under pressure from George Bush and the Israelis, Hamas put some water in its I was going to say water in its wine. That's not a very good metaphor, but agreed to participate in Palestinian elections across all of Palestine. And to the big surprise of the Israelis, to the surprise of the Americans and to most of the West, Hamas won a majority in those elections. Canada had international observers there. And most of the international, I think all of the international observers said it was a free and fair election. But the Bush and Israeli administrations were shocked and refused to accept the results. You may remember at that point, Stephen Harper was our prime minister, and he refused to accept the results as well. So most Israel and most Western countries ignored the election results, and they allowed President Abbas to continue to rule by decree. Now, something I want to draw your attention to here, I think is very important. The map on the right-hand side shows the, I don't know if they use the word ridings or constituencies and so on, but here you see there's the West Bank and there's Gaza. So in the West Bank, the green are the ones that were won by Hamas, and the yellow are the areas that were won by the Fatah movement. In Gaza, the green were won by Hamas, and the yellow run by Fatah. In other words, Hamas actually won more votes and more seats than any other party. But the West refused to allow Hamas to participate in the government, not just in Gaza, but anywhere. So the with the support of Israel and the West, we allowed Mahmoud Abbas to remain in power, and that authority tried to maintain power over Gaza, but Hamas was too strong there. And so as a result, we have today the West Bank is under control of the Palestinian Authority, and Gaza was under control of Hamas, at least until October 7th, 2023. Their situation up until October 7th is there were 2.2 million people under siege. They were being held captive in an outdoor prison, a tiny prison. It's 15% of the Ottawa territory, 360 square kilometers. It's surrounded by an impenetrable fence, or at least the Israelis thought it was impenetrable. It's very poor, per capita income somewhere around $300 US a month. And 2/3 of those people living in Gaza are refugees or the descendants of refugees from 1947-48. Their political status is that they're stateless. They're not citizens of Israel, but they're under the control of Israel. High number are youth and a very high literacy rate because Gaza, until the last few months, had actually 7 universities. They've all been destroyed by Israeli bombing since then. So Hamas, trapped in Gaza, appealed to the international community to no avail, appealed to the Arab countries, brother Arab countries, to help, to no avail. After 2006, it started firing rockets into Israel, but those rockets were more a demonstration of anger and frustration. They had no weight and little effect. And I think I don't have more recent statistics, but I did find that in the 10 years from 2004 to 2014, Hamas rockets killed 27 Israeli civilians, which would mean about 3 civilians a year. So you can say it was a nuisance, it was significant, but it really wasn't a significant threat to an existential threat to Israel. It's mostly a demonstration of frustration and anger in theater. In 2018, Hamas orchestrated what was called the Great March of Return. It was kind of a Gandhi-like civil disobedience. Thousands of Palestinians marched to the border, to the fence. You can see this picture on the bottom right is taken from the Israeli side, but there are the thousands, and I was there myself at the time. It was a massive demonstration of civil disobedience. It was a peaceful demonstration. I think this is important to know. They were certainly throwing rocks where they could, or slingshots. But when I went there, Hamas had set up checkpoints so nobody could get close to the fence with any weapon. They didn't want to have excuses for the Israelis to counterattack. Nonetheless, despite their peaceful demonstration, they thought that the world would not allow Israel to use violence, and that was totally mistaken. There were hundreds were killed, and there was hardly any support from the West. Up till the 4th of October, there were 205 Palestinian deaths, 21,000 had been injured. There was one Israeli death. I'm not exactly sure how that happened, but when I was there, you could see Israeli soldiers standing on the berm here, and it would have been easy to shoot one if anybody had wanted to. So here's the Hamas strategic dilemma. Conditions in Gaza are getting worse every year. You can't drink the water. There's not enough food. There's no work. Electricity is on and off, mostly off. People are dying of cancer. People are not. My friend of mine's mother died of cancer because Israel would not allow her to go to the West Bank to go to a hospital to have a cancer treatment. So the Palestinians in Gaza want a solution. They just see things getting worse and worse and worse every day. They want an end to the blockade, and they want the right to return. And that right has been, the UN says they have the right to return, but they can never affect it, and Israel doesn't allow them to do it. In the West Bank itself, the Israeli settlements continue to grow, and the Palestinian Authority doesn't seem to be able to stop it at all. And so, viewed from inside Gaza, Israel appears invincible, and the world seems to be leaving Palestinians in a perpetual prison. So what to do? So Hamas has learned from experience that, first of all, the UN isn't effective. It doesn't really do anything, and we see that most recently so far, despite all the votes for ceasefire and so on, and it hasn't had much bite so far. The Hamas saw that their rockets didn't really damage Israel. It certainly annoyed them, but in fact, every time they shoot rockets at Israel comes back to the US and says we need more money for more protection. They see that when they participate in democracy, the results of that democracy is not respected. When they demonstrate peacefully, it's repressed in bloodshed. So from them, that is Hamas's strategic dilemma. What do we do? Do we just die or we do something? And that, I think, is the backdrop to what happened in October 7th. So what did happen on October 7th? Well, to resume, here we have a population of 2 million people in this tiny little area here, 50% of whom are children. 3/4 of them are refugees. Many of them from refugees right around the outside of what is now Gaza. They've been chased out of towns just on the periphery here, as also from Jaffa and other places as well. They are shut off by the sea. Israeli naval vessels limit how far Palestinian fishermen can go out to 2 or 3 kilometers. There's a barrier here. They can't get out that. And the access is under tight Israeli control. So from their point of view, it's like a prison. So on the 7th of October, the Palestinians broke out. They broke out at a number of places on the periphery, and they attacked the Israeli military bases all around here, and they attacked a number of the kibbutz. The kibbutz, of course, many of them were built on the very spots where Palestinian villages had been built before 1947-48. In fact, there are very few tall apartment buildings left in Gaza now, but when I was there, you could go up onto the 15th floor of an apartment building and look out over the border and see an Israeli town built on top of land that had been Palestinian until 1947-48. So Hamas broke out early in the morning, October 7th. We think there's somewhere around 1,500 Palestinian fighters with different groups, not all Hamas actually, but Hamas was the biggest group. There was more or less 24 hours of fighting. And during that time, about 1,200 Israelis were killed, including 300 and some soldiers, and a significant number of civilians. And Hamas took over 200 hostages. Hamas and others, the PIJ, took hostages back to Gaza. There were Israel alleged rape and torture and beheading babies and so on. Most of those claims have been walked back. But clearly, there's no doubt that 800 civilians died. I say 1,200 civilians, 800 civilians died. And it's not completely clear how they were killed. The Israeli version, of course, it was all done by Hamas, but there is some argumentation that it was actually a significant amount of it was done by Israeli friendly fire, and we can get back into talking about that in the Q&A. How many Palestinians were killed and how many were captured, I'm not sure, but certainly there are many now in captivity in Israel. So Hamas at first attacked these military bases, but they say they were very surprised at how weak the Israeli defense was. It went in much more quickly than they thought. They seized some tanks. There's some pictures of kids climbing all over a tank. They shot and killed the Israeli soldiers, and they captured some soldiers and some civilians and took them back into Gaza. Gaza had this, as you know, extensive tunnel system, and they had been building this tunnel system for over 10 years because Israel had been repeatedly bombing Gaza for 10 years, and the only safe place for the resistance fighters were in tunnels. There was also a lot of commotion on October 7th. They say Hamas was surprised that they broke through the defenses much quicker than they thought. So you see, here's a bunch of kids with their bicycles. I don't know what they thought they're doing. It's like breaking out of prison. These kids are obviously not armed. They're kind of excited. In fact, some of the kids went to a nearby kibbutz and got some ice cream that they hadn't had access to before. So they're breaking out of prison for these kids who have been born in prison and have never been out before. And so it's excitement to them. Hamas also says that they didn't expect to break through the lines and didn't expect the rave to be there. That was not part of their plan. And some bad things happened as a result of the confrontation with the people who were celebrating at the rave. So what were Hamas's objectives? Well, according to Israel, Hamas's main objective was to kill Jews. It was, in the words of Prime Minister Netanyahu, the worst genocide since the Holocaust. According to Hamas, their objective was to kill our captors, our prison guards, the military, to show that Israel wasn't invincible, to puncture the aura of invincibility of Israel, and to capture hostages to trade for some of the thousands of Palestinians who are currently being held in Israeli jails. We all know too much, I think, about the retaliation since October 7th. Israel declared that they would not allow food or water or medicine to go there. They've bombing, huge waves of bombing, destroying, pretty well destroying everything in Gaza. There tend to be as 50 to 100 people are being killed every day, even today, in the midst of this widespread famine. The Israeli objective appears to be more than just digging out and destroying Hamas. Palestinians say that Israel's objective is to drive them out of Gaza, a second Nakba, echoing back to what happened in 1947-48. And you can see here on the maps, this was northern Gaza. They were first, this area here, they were told by Israel, you have to go farther south for protection. People went farther south, and then they continued to be bombed in any event. So what's the current situation? Well, the Palestinians are now squeezed into a very small area south of Gaza. The UN has said that Rafah is a red line. They can't do that. But Israel continues to bomb and kill and enter Rafah. And the United States doesn't seem to do very much. They keep saying, well, it's not really clear what's happening and so on. It is true that both sides want a ceasefire and a return of the hostages or prisoners. But the big difference is that Israel wants a temporary ceasefire and a return of its hostages, where Hamas wants a permanent ceasefire, and it wants Israel to withdraw from Gaza and resume military aid and to free Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jail. Now, the difference between a temporary ceasefire and a permanent one is very significant because, at least to Hamas, Israel has already said their objective is to wipe out Hamas, and Netanyahu has already said, once the hostages are freed, we will then continue to wipe out Hamas. Hamas has very little leverage, but one of the leverage it has is the hostages. So a temporary ceasefire, which returns the hostages, then leaves Hamas not having that protection or that level of leverage. You will probably have heard of the fact that there is a talk about a Biden-Israel deal with Hamas. It's a three-phase proposal. We can talk about it a little bit in the Q&A, but it does propose a complete ceasefire and withdrawal of Israeli forces from populated areas in Gaza. And it allows the Palestinian civilians to return to their homes in Gaza, and a surge in humanitarian aid. And that has a phase 2 and a phase 3. Now we can talk about this. This is from the Hamas point of view, this is a very tricky exercise because I don't think Hamas will feel comfortable with a deal like this if there aren't some outside guarantees, because they can't rely on the Americans to keep Israel from attacking them again, and they will be essentially unprotected. So I think we can talk a bit about this proposal, but I think that the intense negotiations are underway, and I think there's going to have to be some call to have some other countries involved in ensuring whatever ceasefire there is. So here's at the end of my presentation. Now I'll open it up for questions, but I'll put out some questions for you. Do you think the Palestinians in Gaza have legitimate grievances? What do you think Hamas should have done, given their experiences with the UN, with the rockets, with the Great March of Return, with the election? What should they have done, or what should they do now? What do you think Israel should have done? Or what should Israel do now? Do you think that Israel is justified in trying to wipe out Hamas? Do you think it can do it? Do you think that Israel should be given a free hand to bomb civilians in Gaza in aid of trying to kill off Hamas? And finally, do you think Canada has any responsibility, given that the International Court of Justice has deemed that Israel is plausibly carrying out genocide? So I see that that's my presentation. I'm now open to questions and challenges, discussions. And as I say, you can do it either by raising your hand, which please feel free to do that. I think Zoom records which hands are in which order, or by putting questions in the Q&A. I'm happy to do either way, but I do want a serious challenge, and I encourage people who don't think I went over something quickly or that I've missed some important thing to please raise your thoughts. So, there's nobody raising their hands so far, so maybe you can
Yes,
give me the first question.
I have some questions for you.
Great.
Or at least our attendees have some questions
Sure.
for you that I'll relay.
Sure.
First is, in what capacity was the OFIP chair leading your trips to Israel?
Oh, what I did is I had been teaching courses at Carleton University, and I offered to take people to go and see. We organized come and see tours. There were courses in the learning and retirement program at Carleton. They were not degree courses, credit courses. And so a lot of people said, well, if you were to go to Israel, I'd like to go and see with you. So I organized these trips. They basically were 2-week trips. We spent half the time in Israel, half the time in the West Bank. I tried to structure meetings. We met at the Knesset. We met people from Hamas. We met different people, get different perspectives, refugees, and so on. And it was a come and see tour. So that was it. Was people self-funded, if that's the bottom of the question. There was no, unfortunately, there was no government funding available for these tours.
Thank you. What exact geographic boundaries are recognized as the Palestinian state by those countries that now call for recognition or have actually recognized it?
Okay, so let me go back to here. Oops. Yeah, so this will work here. This third map here is called the 67 borders, and so I say the white area is Canada recognizes this as Israel. Canada does not recognize the state of Palestine at all. So your question is in two parts. We recognize Israel. These are the de facto, well, I'll call them de facto borders, but Israel has never declared its borders because it keeps on expanding. But these were the 67 borders. That was where the armistice lines were, and that's what the UN recognized in 1949 as the boundaries of Israel.
Okay, thank you. Do Palestinians in Gaza have Palestinian passports? And if so, are those passports recognized by many other countries?
No, they don't. Palestinians are not citizens of any state. Palestinians in Gaza are not citizens of any state. They get travel documents when they want. So I've known some Palestinians from Gaza who traveled out of Gaza, but they have special travels doc. It's not a passport per se, and I'm not enough of an expert, not expert at all. You know, I can't really tell you the difference. I know that's not the same thing. It's less valuable. For example, even a friend of mine, a young man who was a Palestinian trying to return from Canada back to, this is back in Ramallah, not Gaza. He had a document that was valid for travel to Canada, but when his return flight went through Frankfurt, it was not valid in Germany. So they're continually having to check where their travel document is good and where it's not good. It's a headache.
Thank you.
I'll just also say their identity documents are all issued by Israel. So every Palestinian in the West Bank, inside Israel, or in Gaza, has an Israeli registration number. It's given by the Ministry of the Interior or some Israeli office.
One participant asks, I've heard from several sources that this could be the end of Israel, in quotations. What does that mean? Or what could that mean?
Wow. I've certainly heard that as well. Um, the people who argue that, I think, feel that Israel, by its actions in Gaza, by the genocide in Gaza, they would call it a genocide, has lost its social license. It cannot regain itself as a credible and respected member of the international community. And they also see huge internal contradictions in Israel between the increasingly right-wing fundamentalists and the secular Israelis, who have a different, who are in many ways closer to what normal Canadians would be. And because a lot of those secular Israelis have foreign passports, I don't know what the numbers are, but a significant percentage of Israelis have foreign passports, foreign nationalities. They envisage that if the secularists, the right wing taking over will lead the secularists to leave, and Israel will live under international opprobrium like apartheid South Africa and will no longer be able to exist as a Jewish state. And that, like South Africa, the state will have to be reconfigured on the basis of democracy and equality.
Thank you. One of our participants says she has her hand raised, but I'm not able to see it, and I don't think you are either.
Okay, let me see.
So I will unmute
okay.
Barbara Cairns. Oh, now she's gone.
When you and I did this before, there was a raise hand button. Is the person saying they see a raise hand button, but the hand doesn't raise?
That's right. And
so click on what I've done, Grafton, or to the person.
Okay, I've
Hello?
opened her.
Okay, I hear a voice.
I've opened her mic.
Great, now you can hear me. Thank you so much. I guess I joined late, so I missed. Was there a reason we can't see each other? Is that for people's safety, or I can't see anybody except our host? And I respect that if that, and I thank you for this presentation. My good friend Jim Wicks encouraged me to attend this. I've been involved at.
You lost your audio there.
There, any better?
That's fine. Yes, that's
okay.
Fine.
So my question is, so Jim Wicks invited me to attend. So thank you, Jim. I don't know if he's here. How do I stay hopeful? I'm doing, I mean, it's so overwhelming, all of this stuff. And it's actually more than overwhelming. It's depressing and scary because we're allowing all this to continue to happen. And I'm writing letters, and I've trained in the blanket exercise, and I'm on Just Peace. But I was just feeling so discouraged one day, and I just said, my heart is breaking. And so do you have anything to offer?
Barbara, first of all, that's a great question, and I have to admit that it's shivers run through me when I know I have a number of friends in Gaza who've been killed, others who I don't hear from anymore. You know, my view is that, first of all, Canada is a long ways away. We don't have very much leverage over this. We can do some things. If Canada were to recognize the state of Palestine, if Canada were to stand up for UNRWA, and the churches and the other organizations that you're involved in can play a role there. We can't beat ourselves up for doing things that we really can't do. We can only do what we think is right and just, and that has to make you able to sleep at night. There are lots of terrible things that go on in the world. This is one where I think our government could be doing a lot more and isn't. But yeah, that's the best I can.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Grafton, if the person tries at the bottom right on my screen, there are 3 dots and says more, and then it says raise hand there. Mine goes up. So does that work?
Yeah. Your hand is up now.
Okay, and I'll lower my hand so others who want to raise hand can use that.
It was me. Can you still hear me? It's Barbara. And my hand was raised, but I don't think you saw it because you said nobody's raised their hand.
I see. Okay.
Somebody got it, and I've been answered. So thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Anyway, others try to raise hand, and if you don't, you can send on the chat, you can send a note to Grafton, and he will see if you want to be recognized. Grafton?
I have another question in the Q&A.
Sure.
Can the 215 Palestinian MDs imprisoned by Israel be considered hostages held by Israel?
I haven't seen that figure before, so I don't know. I do know that after the 2006 election, the Hamas won a plurality of, and a number of the Hamas candidates those who won and those who lost were, many of them were arrested, and some of them are still in jail. I don't know that I don't know what the number is. Whether you would call them a hostage or not, I guess it would sort of depend on the Kazakhs. If they were arrested for killing someone, then I guess you couldn't call it a hostage. If they're arrested because they were speaking out against settler colonialism, then I'd say so. So I can't really speak generally to that.
Okay, thank you. Another participant asks, I think you could have covered the Israeli interference with and blockage of aid. Do you feel they're actually trying to starve the Palestinians out?
Yes, I do. In fact, they've said that's what their intention is. And then when there's more international pressure, they make certain gestures, like with the Americans to make this pier, but they keep on blocking the trucks at the Rafah border, and they keep on blocking the trucks at the Eretz border. We need thousands of trucks to go in, and there's not anywhere near that's happening. And I think I personally believe that Israel's objective is to drive them out, and to drive them out either using a variety of forces, including terrible starvation, but also the bombing, killing the doctors, killing the journalists, bombing the universities, trying to make it so that the Gaza is no longer livable. And I think that keep restricting the aid. I don't think that Mr. Netanyahu deliberately wanted to bomb that, what was it called, the World Central Kitchen. I think that was a political catastrophe for them. But in general, they've been disrupting aid convoys. I think that one wasn't smart because the guy who was in charge of it that was well connected in Washington, and so they got a lot of play. But in general, they've been systematically blocking aid coming into Gaza.
Okay, thank you. You asked to engage with people who might disagree, and there is one rather long comment, which I'll read. A point of correction regarding the March of Return. You said there were no armed people amongst the crowd. An independent UN commission reported on it, apparently on May 14th, which was the day the protests peaked. That was the day, I think, the US embassy was opened in Jerusalem. Anyways, there were 59 or 60 Palestinians were shot dead at 12 clash points. Hamas claimed 50 of them were its members. Islamic Jihad claimed 3 of the 62 as members of its military wing. Okay, yes. So, yes.
What's the point? I don't understand. A lot of Hamas people were killed at the Great March of Return for sure, but they weren't armed. At least only one Israeli soldier was killed, which is sort of an indication. I could see Israeli soldiers walking on the berm. Even I could have shot them if I had, because that was not a difficult thing to do. So there may well have been Hamas militants there leading the demonstration. I think they probably were.
Okay. What role have neighboring countries played in helping the Palestinians?
This is an excellent question. The short answer is not much. And in fact, I think that most of the leaders of the neighboring countries hope that Israel crushes Hamas. Most of the leaders in the neighboring countries are dictatorships that are not well liked by their own populations in Jordan, in Egypt, even in Saudi Arabia. And and they depend a lot on the US for support. So I think for them, if Hamas were to win, if Hamas were to defeat Israel, that would create a lot more tension in their own countries. So I think that they vote at the UN, they make a lot of noise at the UN, but in fact, they've provided almost no help to the Palestinians. And I think it's because it's not in their interest to do so.
Thank you. Another listener apparently is having trouble raising their hand, so I will read their question for you. Your
You can't unmute them, Grafton?
I can. I will give you another question while I look for that.
Okay.
Does
All right.
does the UN not feel some responsibility for leaving the Palestinians officially stateless?
Well, the UN, as people understand, is not a organic body. The UN doesn't think. The UN is a collection of member states, and I think the UN voted in 1947 to hive off part of Palestine and give it to immigrant Jewish refugees. I am pretty sure that if that same vote were to be put to the UN today, there's no way it would be passed. At the time, there was only about 45 members of the UN. It was almost largely dominated by the Western countries. But I think it's very unlikely that today the UN with 198 countries would approve of a motion like that. Now, do the Western countries feel concerned? I think we feel a lot more concern about the Holocaust than we do about the Nakba. In fact, we feel more concerned about the Holocaust that happened 75 years ago than we do about the ongoing genocide today in Gaza. And I think everybody on this call I'm in a better position than anybody else on this call to explain why that is the case in Canada.
Okay, I hope I've unmuted the next caller, Mr. Cumming. Are you, is your microphone open?
There, I think it's open now.
I hear you.
We hear
you.
Thank you, Peter. That was a very good overview. I'm wondering if you could comment more specifically on the use of the terms ethnic cleansing,
sure,
and genocide. Of course, we all know that the government of South Africa has brought a charge before the International Court of Justice, which will take some time for the final adjudication, but the court has already found it plausible. So I'm wondering, in light of your experience and your intense observation over many years now, are these terms valid? Are they hyperbole? If you could comment in
sure,
a little greater depth on these issues, I'd be grateful. Thank
sure.
you.
So let me take the easier one, which is the ethnic cleansing. About 10 years ago, I read a book, an excellent book by an Israeli scholar named Ilan Pappé, called The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. And at the time, it was actually my wife read it before I did, and I was resistant. I didn't like the title because in my view at that time, ethnic cleansing was what had happened in Rwanda. It was massive, it was genocide. That's how I saw ethnic cleansing. However, I did read the book, and I came to realize that ethnic cleansing has a more specific meaning. It means cleaning an area of an ethnicity that you don't want. Now, one way to do that is to murder people. Another way is to drive them out. And so I don't have any qualms in saying that what Israel did in 1947-48 in the creation of Israel was ethnic cleansing. And I say that because they had no option. If they wanted to create a Jewish state in a land that was majority non-Jews, they had to get those people to leave some way. Now, one way to get them to leave would be to offer them a lot of money to transfer somewhere else or whatever. But basically, the Palestinians, large majority of their population, were peasants. Their goods were their goats, their trees, their houses. They couldn't take them with them. So the only way to create a Jewish state was to get those people to leave, and the only way to get them to leave was to scare them into leaving. So that's, I think, ethnic cleansing was applicable to what was going on there. I think it is applicable to what Israel is doing in the West Bank, and I think it's exactly applicable to what Israel is doing in Gaza today. The question about genocide, I actually personally don't really care whether you call it genocide or crime against humanity or mass murder or slaughter or whatever. I think it's unproductive to get, for non-lawyers, to get deep into the weeds on whether it constitutes a genocide or not. I think it is significant at the international level because if it's called genocide, certain things flow from it. But in terms of the kind of discussion that we have here today, I don't care whether you call it genocide or mass murder or slaughter. It is killing human beings on a horrendous scale, and I find it appalling.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to follow up on there's another question regarding use of language. The word hostage, which tends to invoke a compassionate response, versus prisoner, which tends to evoke a feeling of wrongness, etc.
Yeah, okay.
I guess what terms would you use for the people who are being held by each side?
I don't care. I mean, I really don't think it's. I'm sorry for the questioner, but I don't really care. You can call them hostages or prisoners who are the Israelis who are being held in Gaza, or you can call them hostages or prisoners that are being held by Israelis in. The circumstances are a little bit different, but I don't really want to spend a lot of time on. I'm sorry, I don't want to spend a lot of time on that question.
Okay, thank you.
I would. I've been trying to find a way to send you a note, Grafton. I can't, but I do want to come back to a question. No one's challenged me yet, and I hope that someone's going to raise the question about what happened on October 7th and who killed whom. But I don't want to prejudge the audience, but I would like to get into that.
Okay, I haven't seen that question yet.
Okay.
How effective do you think the university campus encampments have been?
I don't really want to discuss. I want to talk about what happened in Gaza. I mean, the short answer is I think they've been effective in raising profile. They haven't been very effective in changing Canadian policy. But this is not a seminar about Canadian policy in particular. I want to lead the discussion on my presentation, if you don't mind, on what happened in Gaza and the consequences.
Okay. Catherine Garvey has a question, and I saw the hand raised, so I have opened your mic. Catherine Garvey.
The United States has been such a strong supporter of Israel. I don't know when this started, and I don't understand why they support Israel no matter what Israel has done. I know lately, of course, President Biden is working on it, but I don't understand why the States, more than any other country, has shown such strong support for Israel. Can you fill me in on that, please, Peter?
I can give you. I'll give you happy to share my view on it. The United States recognized Israel in 1948, as did the Soviet Union for different reasons. Each country wanted to have a bit of a toehold in the area, but in 1967, the circumstances changed. The geopolitics played out in a way where the Soviet Union really was the supporter of the Arab states, and the Americans were supporting Israel. And when Israel clobbered the Arab states in 1967 in what was called the Six-Day War, after that, Israel became America's really important strategic ally in a region that is very important for two things. It's important for its oil, and it's important for the Suez Canal. And the West wanted to have basically a control over that area, and Israel was a very important factor in that. I think, of course, there is also the factor of the Israel lobby, of the whole question about the collective guilt over the Holocaust, and so on and so forth. But I think that the United States has a very strong strategic interest in supporting Israel, which is one of the reasons why the arms industry is so keen. The oil industry is so much on board with the Israel lobby.
Okay, that makes sense, because in my own thoughts, I just thought, well, it's an air base that if the United States needs a place to safely land its military jets and so on, that they would be able to do that in Israel. But anyway, I like your answer. It's more comprehensive. Thank you, Peter.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Claudia Galvey has a question. Galvey, I'm sorry if I mispronounced. I've opened your mic.
Yes, hello, it's Claudia Galvis, and but I'm listening to the, my name is Michel, I'm listening to the presentation also, and I have a question for you. In October and November, I was hearing that the Hamas wanted to kill all Israelis, and that's why Netanyahu was saying, well, we're going to go in and we're going to kill all people from the Hamas because they are a threat, and they are threatening us of killing everybody. So how accurate are these statements? Was that only something that Israeli wanted to say, like to justify their attacks, or was that something that was really said by the Hamas? And so what's your point of view on that?
So there are several answers to that question. It's a great question, and I probably can't deal with it completely tonight, but I can say two things. The original Hamas charter that was, I don't have the date, Grafton may remember the dates, but I think it was 1987, I think, was a kind of a FLQ kind of rant, and it was very anti-Semitic. It argued against Jews. It said that Jews had caused the Russian Revolution, had caused the French Revolution. The Jews had infiltrated the Rotary clubs, pursuing a Zionist agenda. It was almost was sad as a document. However, and they wanted to kill Jews. However, they revised their constitution, their document in Grafton. You may remember the exact date. Now they make it very, very clear that their aim is not to kill Jews. It's to upset and replace the state of Israel. They are opposed to Zionism, but not against Jews. I can maybe in a
2017, I think is
okay, that's right.
Yes.
So now, of course, a lot of Jews feel very attached to Zionism, so they feel that that's just wordsmithing and it's not really very significant. So that's part of the answer. In the document that Hamas published after October 7th, called Our Narrative, they made it very clear in a 17-page document, they're not out to kill Jews. They're out to overthrow the state of Israel, which has taken over their land. So that's the first part of the answer. The second part of the answer is that Netanyahu and company portrayed this breakout as if it was presenting an existential threat to Israel. Well, let's get a grip. There were about 1,500 guys on motorcycles and pickup trucks with machine guns facing a country with a military of several 100,000, with helicopter gunships, tanks, fighter jets, and so on. There's no way they could have gone more than 25 yards. They needed water. I mean, they were out to get captives, I think, to kill their captors, to capture hostages and take them back. But the breakout by Hamas on October 7th wasn't remotely an existential danger to Israel, in my view.
Okay. Okay, but how can we recognize what is real in the affirmations that we hear? Because we know that the United States and Canada are more towards the Jewish part. How can we recognize if they're telling us the truth? And
Well, I think you have to first of all, I take as a premise that in war everybody lies. Just I think
yeah, okay.
or exaggerates or whatever. So you got to look at what they're doing, what they can do, be realistic.
Yeah.
I think that the Hamas objective on October 7th was, as they said, they wanted to attack and kill their captors. They wanted to show that the Israeli military was not all powerful, and they wanted to capture hostages to take back to Gaza. That's what I think they were trying to do.
Yeah.
But you have to keep on. I think you have to study this carefully. I guess I'll say one more thing. It's Michel, I think you said.
Yeah, Michel.
Without going there and talking to people, it takes a lot of talking to people before you kind of get a sense of who you believe and who you don't believe. And I'm now comfortable. Although I still know that when I travel around in Palestine and someone shows me that my house was here and it was torn down by the Israelis last week, I say to myself, well, maybe that's true, but maybe it didn't happen last week, and maybe it was a fight with his neighbors, and maybe some. But by talking to people, you get a sense of who you think you can believe. And that I don't speak Arabic, I don't speak Hebrew. I do the best I can to try to make a judgment.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for your answer.
My pleasure.
Okay. Thank you. One of our participants has shared in the Q&A some information about Palestinian MDs held prisoner. I will send it in the chat so that everyone can see that, and thank you for doing that. I'm going to combine a couple of questions. Peter, to what extent do you believe Hamas bears responsibility for the magnitude of the deaths in Gaza? And what do you see as the impact of the processes of the International Court of Justice?
Okay, those are two questions. To what extent does Hamas bear responsibility? I think that Hamas had to know that the response by Israel was going to be massive. They knew that. There had been 4 previous experiences of what Israel called mowing the lawn, where they came in with massive attacks and bombed houses, destroyed electrical generators, and so on and so forth. One of my best friends lives in Gaza. His older brother was a Hamas member and was killed in an earlier attack by Israel. So in one sense, Hamas knew that the Israeli response was going to be massive. Did they know how massive it was going to be? I don't know. I think the massiveness of the Israeli response depended largely on Israel's ability to convince the world, and in particular the Western world, that Hamas had launched a genocidal attack, the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust, that they were in fact human animals and they needed to be wiped out. I think Israel has been spectacularly successful in sending that message around the world. It's not one that I personally believe in. I'm very skeptical of that message, but it has been successful. And as a result, it's taken only countries in the global south, basically, until recently, that have even raised a finger. Countries in the West have not done anything until recently with Norway, Spain, and one other country recognizing Palestine and so on. It's been the global south. That's right, Ireland. It's been the global south, South Africa, Nicaragua. Most recently, Chile has joined in. And that's because those countries are much less haunted by the memory and the shame and the guilt of the Holocaust. They didn't have anything to do with the Holocaust, whereas the European countries did. And that message spread around. I also believe personally that Hamas falsely, erroneously thought that it would get more support from other Arab countries. It got some support from Hezbollah, as you know, some from the Houthis, but basically the other Arab countries have sat on their hands. And I think they probably were expecting more support than they got. So are they responsible for it? Well, they provoked it. They knew something was going to happen, but I think that it's worse than they anticipated. One thing I've been trying to get at in several interviews with Palestinians in Gaza, and I don't have a clear answer on this. I asked people, do people now blame Hamas? Do you think, what the hell did you do to us? And I cannot get, even in private conversations, people to say, yes, Hamas was terrible. They should all be thrown out. On the contrary, my understanding is that Hamas recruiting is going along well in Gaza now. A lot of younger people whose parents have been killed and so on and so forth. They're not as well trained, but their numbers are increasing. That's my understanding. I can't prove it.
Thank you. The other question, which I attempted to link to that, had to do with responsibility, and that's what do you see as the role of the International Court of Justice, and will its rulings have any deterrent effect?
In my view, the key to this is the United States. As long as the United States keeps on arming Israel, defending Israel at the Security Council, trying to shield Israel from the International Criminal Court, as long as the U.S. defends Israel, it will have no effect whatsoever. So the question becomes, what factors might make the United States back off? And I think there's a potential combination of internal factors. We see the campus protests in the States and the activism in the States, the young Jewish groups getting active and so on. That will, Biden isn't going into an election. He's worried about his younger progressive votes. That's him. And a second kind of pressures is the United States' reputation in the world is taking a great hit. Now that reputation is important to the United States. It means that they are going to be less able to rally those countries against China, for example, or less able to get those countries to join the United States in its fight against Russia. So I think that there are a series. What would happen, for example, if there were a coup d'etat in Saudi Arabia and new rulers came to power in Saudi Arabia that were friendly to China? That would change things dramatically, or in Egypt, for example. So I think the United States needs to worry about its geo-positioning.
Thank you. There are many, many more questions in the chat than we'll have time to, in the Q&A than we'll have time to get to. So I'm kind of jumping around, taking them out of order, trying to get different topics, and also to get to the more challenging ones. One participant asks, if Israel has lost its, quote, social license, couldn't we say that Canada, the United States, and any number of other countries, all of which have committed genocide against their indigenous peoples, have they not also lost their social license? From my perspective, Israel has as much right to exist as does Canada.
Well, that's an interesting perspective. I mean, I'm of the people that think that what we did to our indigenous people was appalling, and I'm willing to enter into truth and reconciliation and to make reparations. I think that that if we're able to do so, what has happened in the past has happened. We can't undo that, but we can make arrangements. We can make compensation moving forward. I don't think that Israel has lost its social license because of what it did in 1947-48. I think it's lost its social license because of what it's doing now.
What role do you see China and Russia playing?
I think this is a fascinating question. I see that China, there was just a major meeting of Arab countries in Beijing, including the PLO as well, the PA. I think China has been very careful to stick scrupulously to international law on this, and it has no soldiers, no bases, no particular influence. But what would happen, for example, what would the situation be if China played a major role in the reconstruction of Gaza? How would that change the geopolitical perspective? China's main interest is in the Belt and Road. It wants to trade with Europe. China is still a developing country. It wants peace in that region and will be willing to make efforts to make that peaceful so that it can get on with its main objective, which is an economic one.
Thank you. One attendee reminds us that you posed in your questions at the beginning questions about BDS, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, and Canadian investments. Do you feel BDS, boycott, divestment, sanction, is a legitimate form of resistance?
Of course. No, I think boycott and divestment and sanctions are all very legitimate. They're legal, they're nonviolent, and I think they should be supported by everyone. I think Canada should be supporting it. I saw recently that I think it's Malaysia or Maldives. The Maldives have said they don't want Israeli tourists to come. They've decided they won't accept Israeli. You remember in South Africa, it was when the South African rugby team couldn't participate in international competitions. There was a big fight in Europe at the Eurovision about whether or not Israel would be able to participate in the Eurovision Song Contest. So as the powers increase, Israel is going to find that it's more and more isolated on the international stage, and I think that's a good thing. I hope a day comes when a new democratic Israel will be reintegrated into the family of nations, but that's not the direction we're heading to right now.
If you'll permit me to follow up on that, what do you think the Canadian government should be doing right now?
Well, I think we should recognize the state of Palestine. That would bring a certain amount of pressure on Israel. For example, all those goods that are now currently produced in the West Bank will no longer be able to enter Canada as products of Israel. I think Canada should be supporting UNRWA. Canada should be facilitating Palestinian refugees to come to Canada. We have to keep in mind that Canada is a marginal player. Even if Grafton, you were the Prime Minister and I was the head of Middle East affairs, Canada is not a big player here. We can't do very much. We don't have troops on the ground. We don't have big investments. I'm in favor of cutting off military sales to Israel, but in fact, our sales are, I don't think they're 15th or 20th on the list of countries selling material to Israel. So we just have to be realistic about Canada's ability to influence events 6,000, 7,000, 10,000 kilometers away.
It's been said that Israel itself funded or supported Hamas in the beginning. Can you expand a bit on that, or can you respond to that?
My understanding is two parts. At the very beginning, so back in the 80s, my understanding is that at that point, Hamas was quite religious and largely, don't want to be pejorative, it was like a church, like social good kind of organization for old people and so on and so forth. And Israel did support, encourage Hamas to develop, because at that point, the PLO was seen as Israel's main objective antagonist. And I've been told, for example, when the PLO or the Fatah would organize a demonstration on Monday at 2 o'clock, then Hamas would say, no, we'll have a demonstration on Tuesday at 3 o'clock. And it created it served the Israelis' interest at first to promote Hamas. However, as Hamas became, particularly after 2006, Hamas became the governing power in Gaza, then Hamas became useful to Israel as kind of the boogeyman. And every time Hamas launched rockets at Israel, it enabled Netanyahu to go to the States and say, we need more money for defense. So I read in Haaretz, and believe it to be true, that Netanyahu in particular was allowing money from, I think, Qatar or one of the UAE to go to Hamas because he felt it served his interest. He's now come in for a lot of criticism of that. I have no way of proving it, but I think that thesis is widely believed to be the true in Israel.
Thank you. More geostrategic question. The United States and the West support, what do you think are the underpinnings of the US and Western support for Israel? Is it all about oil and natural gas? Is it about Israel being a forward military base, an unsinkable aircraft carrier? Or are there other factors, other issues at play?
I tried to address this a little bit before. I think it's a combination of factors. I think those are factors for sure. Israel is the only in an area that's very, very important strategically, not just the United States, but to Europe. And therefore, the control of the area, the fact that the US can control the area is important to Europe. Those are all important factors. It's the only country in the Middle East where there can't be a coup. There won't be a pro-Chinese coup in Israel, but there could be in Egypt, for example, and that would be a mess. So Israel has a special relationship to the United States on that basis. But I did not mean to discount the affective issues. Most Canadians, and I think most Americans, still feel very guilty, very concerned. The Holocaust was certainly an atrocity. We didn't do very much. Every Canadian remembers the St. Louis that we turned back and sent those people back to Europe, and many of them were subsequently killed. So we feel. I think we also feel, in a kind of general way, we feel that the Israelis are us, where the Arabs are them. And I don't think that's a good thing, but I believe it's true. When you listen to the analysis on the news, for example, we're completely, when the deal was announced, for example, the question is what the contradictions were in Israel. The conversation wasn't about what should Hamas do. We tend to view this issue from an Israeli perspective. And that's partly because they're European whites, and those other people are brown and speak Arabic, and we don't like a lot of the things they do. And so we find it easier to identify with Israel. So I think it's a geostrategic, historic guilt, racism, or identity politics. I think all those things are mixed in together.
Thank you. How do you see democracy being established in a Palestinian state, contrary to their own history? You mentioned that Hamas won an election in 2006, but then there was almost a civil war between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority the following year. Not a single Arab state has a democracy. Hamas is much more popular in the PA, and it is virtually a totalitarian organization, and certainly a terrorist one. How would you respond to that?
There's a lot of pieces there. I'm not sure what piece of it to pick up. It's absolutely true that Hamas conducted and undertook terrorist activities, particularly in the 90s and 2000s. That's absolutely true. But weak national liberation movements, whether it was the FLN in Algeria, whether it was in Vietnam, whether it was in Ireland, weak parties have few levers to fight against a dominant party. So I'm not an advocate of terrorism, but I think we have to understand it in a broad historical perspective. It is true that all those countries in the region, the only countries in the regions that have elections that are of any kind of credibility are Iran and Lebanon. That's not true in Jordan. Syria, I can't even comment on it now because I don't understand what the situation is. Egypt. Those are all dictatorships, and those are dictatorships which are actually promoted and supported by the West. When Egypt had an election and elected Mr. Morsi, there was a coup, and the Americans supported a coup. Why did they support a coup? Because they didn't like the politics of what that a democratic election would achieve. Same thing in Jordan. There could be a democratic revolt in Jordan, but you can be sure that the Americans are going to try to make sure that the king, who is actually more British than Arab, stays in place. So when someone says those Arab countries are all dictatorships and draws from that the conclusion that somehow Arabs are less capable of dictatorship, that abstracts from the discussion the efforts the West has made. For example, I know that Iran is not an Arab country, but when Mossadegh was elected, the CIA and the British MI5 or MI6 colluded to get him kicked out. We didn't want the results. We don't like democracy because when countries are democratic, the first thing they'll do is try to raise the price and get more value out of their natural resources. And we don't want that. We are rich because they're poor. We want to continue to get cheap oil, cheap passes, cheap bananas. So that's an objective fact that we are supporting democracies all through the Middle East and elsewhere in the world because it's in our interest to do so.
Now that a one-state solution is being discussed more often, do you think this could be a potential solution? If so, what exactly would need to happen? And does the UN have to have an active role in this?
First of all, I think the one-state solution is being discussed amongst Palestinians in the diaspora. I'm not aware of it being very broadly discussed within West Bank, inside Israel, or in Gaza. I'm not aware of it. Certainly the major parties, even Hamas, has a kind of a qualified position on that. So someone else can help me with that. It's not right now a massive movement. We can say that amongst Palestinians. How would it work? Geez, I don't know. That would be up to a Palestinian political party that believes in that to start saying, okay, practically, concretely, how are we going to get there? I have seen small groups, the One Democratic State Initiative and a variety of others, but they're basically, to my understanding, and I'm happy to be corrected, still mostly intellectual initiatives that don't have a broad popular base amongst Palestinians.
Thank you. There are a number of people who are asking about the precise boundaries that are contemplated in the state of Palestine that various countries have recognized, or various countries that are supporting a two-state solution. I don't know if you feel you're able to answer that.
No, I'm not. I will say that I assume that they're all basically along what's called the 67 borders, which is the borders that came out of the armistice agreements with the various countries, with Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon in 1948, 49. There were three separate, and Egypt. There were four separate agreements, and those became the internationally recognized borders of Israel until Israel took over the West Bank, and those borders were wiped out. But Israel has never declared its borders, so we don't know what that means.
Indeed. And I believe that some of these countries that have recognized Palestine have not defined the specific boundaries that they recognize. They haven't spelled that out.
Yeah.
But I'm not, perhaps one of our listeners can enlighten us on that. If Israel's goal is to drive Palestinians out of Gaza, where would they go? Are there any neighboring countries willing to take them?
None of the neighboring countries want them. Absolutely not, for a number of reasons. One is that all those countries are poor. The last thing they need is another couple of million refugees. They also come at it from an ethical point of view. You know, the vote in the UN in 1947, the European countries voted the partition of Palestine, which yielded the refugees. The Arab countries all voted against it. So they're saying, you kicked out these, or you facilitated the expulsion of the Palestinians. We voted against it, and now you want us to look after the refugees? How's that fair? I'm going to. I see it's 9. I see we're down to 60 some participants. I'd be good for another 10 minutes or so. I don't want to go on all evening, but if there is demand, I'd be very happy to have another session at some point in the future. Maybe not in the immediate future, but depending upon. Or I can also suggest if people want to have questions that didn't get answered, please send them in to me at ofip.chair@gmail.com. I will send you all a follow-up email including this transcript of this and a way to contact me if you have specific questions that you want to ask me or Grafton. Grafton, I cut you off there. You were asking a question, but I think we're good for another 10 minutes or so, and then maybe we should wind up.
Okay. One of our listeners would like you to follow up on your thoughts about the one-state solution. They understood you to say it depends on the Palestinian diaspora. Could you elaborate on that?
No, I didn't. No, I don't mean that. No, at all. What I'm saying, my understanding is that it is something that is quite actively discussed in the Palestinian diaspora today, these days. But I don't think it has much traction inside Palestine. When I say Palestine, I mean 48 Palestine, the West Bank, and Gaza right now. I don't think so. I happen to be corrected, but based on my discussions with people, I think there still is a default to the notion of a two-state solution.
Would you say, or to what extent would you say Canada is complicit in the mass killing of Palestinians?
Well, we're certainly not complicit like the Americans. We're not sending bombs there, as far as I know. We're not voting. We voted in favor of a ceasefire. It took us time to do so, but we have done so. We have said that we would acknowledge, we would be open to acknowledging the state of Palestine and not wait until Israel agreed to it. Our former position was that we're in favor of an independent state of Palestine, but only when the Israelis agreed, which always seemed to me like a ludicrous position. It was like saying that we're in favor of a woman's right to divorce as long as her husband agrees. What kind of right is that? It was a foolish position, but didn't get very close examination. So no, I guess there's complicity and complicity. I think Canada could and should be doing a lot more, but I wouldn't put us in the same category as the United States.
Thank you. Why are some countries like the United States, Germany, Britain, and Canada so determined to support Israel no matter what it does? What is in it for these countries?
Well, I think actually you have to, for every country, in my view, this is my realist politics theory, it's not me, John Mersheimer. Every country does things in their own interest. They find nice justifications for doing things, but they're really acting in their own interest. And I think that why Canada is a strong supporter of Israel is different from why Germany is a strong supporter of Israel, and different from why America is a strong supporter of Israel. I think in Canada, I mean, there's some overlap, of course. In Germany, clearly the weight of the Holocaust is entered into the German psyche. I think it'd be very difficult for the Germans to reverse. They have seen the support for Israel as the proof that they have overcome their historic crimes, and so on. We don't feel quite, that's not the same motivation here in Canada. I think in addition to our very significant Jewish lobby here, which is significant, one of the main drivers is that Canada has to keep a very close eye on what the Americans are doing. At a time, for example, at a time when Trump was promoting his the grand plan or the great plan or the great bargain, Trump was promoting a plan for Palestine. It would have been very awkward for the Canadian government to say, we disagree, because all that would do is get Trump and the Americans mad at us, and we wouldn't been able to have any effect anyway. So why, if you were Trudeau, why would you risk some parts of your trade relationship with your most important ally and your most important trading partner for something over which you really have no control whatsoever? So I think Canada is largely defined by its subordinate relationship to the United States. And I think that is just a practical issue for the Prime Minister, whether it's a conservative or a liberal, or for that matter, even an NDP.
Should Israel be held to account? It seems that Israel has operated with impunity for so long it has become immune to responsibility, says one of our participants.
I certainly agree with that. I mean, I look forward to the day that Netanyahu and his other collaborators do appear in the International Criminal Court. But I think we have a much bigger issue here that we need to be very careful of. And that is, at the end of the Second World War, we made the Nuremberg trials, where we accused and tried the top Nazis. But it was kind of an effort by Germany to put the blame on a few people. Whereas in fact, anti-Semitism and the Nazi ideology was widely supported inside Israel. And I think today we have the same phenomenon in Israel. Even if Netanyahu were to go, Israel's policies would not change. So while I'd be happy to see Netanyahu and others at the International Criminal Court, what we need in Israel is a much broader racism activity. And that's going to be very, very hard to do.
Thank you. Charlene Planchon has had her hand up for a while. I've unmuted you. Go ahead.
Her deputy minister, but it's the same. Peter, you've been quite vocal and explicit on your disbelief in the possibility of a two-state solution. Yet, the last few weeks, the last few months, everybody now is behind the two-state solution. Is this just a posture from various government spokespeople, or are they sincere? Or have they discovered the light?
I'm not opposed to a two-state solution. I'm a Canadian. Doesn't make any difference to me whether it's 1 state, 2 states, 3 states. Okay, I don't have a dog in this fight. What I do say is I don't think there is a two-state solution to be found. There might be a two-state deal. It's possible. I think Canada should recognize the state of Palestine, but I think it will quickly turn out to shoot that it's not a solution. It leaves the Palestinians in Israel as second-class citizens in a kind of a Jim Crow sort of situation. It leaves the refugees still stuck in refugee camps around the world, and it leaves the Palestinians living in what becomes Palestine in a tiny area that's mostly desert, dependent on Israel for water and electricity and so on. I just don't think it could possibly work. I think it's a dream. But if they want to try it, I think I'm in favor of supporting the idea of a Palestinian state. Go for it. But I don't think it's going to solve the problems.
Is a one-state solution another dream? And if so, it's a desperate situation. There's no solution.
No, I do believe that in the end, the only answer to this is equality. That there's no Jewish supremacy. Right now, there's Jewish supremacy from the river to the sea. There's one form of Jewish supremacy on the West Bank, another form inside Israel, another form in Gaza, and so on. There has to be equality. Whether that equality comes out as 1 state or 2 states or 3 doesn't really matter. That's not the issue. The issue is the Zionist ideology, which says that Jews have more rights to that area than the Palestinians. And as long as people believe that and support that and militarily support that, there will not be peace, because those people who are disaffected by that will resist. So it's not, I think the only answer is equality, and I think probably it makes sense that will happen in one democratic state. But I'm not an advocate of that. That's up for the Palestinians themselves, first of all. They have to, if they want to do that, they have to be, is that going to be an Islamic state? I think even the Palestinians themselves have to come to agreement on what they want in that kind of state.
Yeah, thank you.
Merci, Peter.
Maybe one more question, Grafton?
What can Canada do to help humanitarian aid enter Gaza?
What can Canada do to help? I think the trucks are lined up there. I mean, short of sending Canadian military to escort trucks in, that means getting into Canadian military actually engaging with Israeli military. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that the best that Canada can do is bring a range of sanctions, political sanctions on Israel. We have, and speaking up. For example, I think when Norway and Ireland say they recognize the state of Israel, that's pressure on their state of Palestine. That's pressure. Canada can cut off military supplies to Israel. I think we've already done that to some extent. We can call to legal. The Canadian Parliament has said we think that BDS is bad. The Canadian Parliament could pass a resolution saying we support BDS. There's lots that Canada could do, but it's not in a direct physical sense. I don't think it's our ability to act is political.
Thank you, Peter. There are still a few questions in the chat and in the Q&A, but I think it's time for you to wrap up.
Because I can't see people's faces, I don't know how to judge that. I mean,
okay, I can, if you have time, I think you already responded to this in a way. One listener had asked if Israel has a right to exist. Now there's a question, does Israel have a right to exist as a Jewish ethnic state? Okay,
well, let me tackle that.
Okay.
This is a good question. It's often raised, does Israel have a right to exist? I would say that in clear, no state has a right to exist. There's no such thing as a right of any state to exist. Canada doesn't have the right to exist. It does exist. Israel does exist. But when you say right to exist, that implies that it's some kind of a permanence, that it to exist forever. And we know from reality that states come and go. The Soviet Union was created in 1917. It was dissolved in 1991. The state of Rhodesia, the settler colonial state of Rhodesia, was created in 1965. It was replaced in 1980 by Zimbabwe. In 10 years from now, will Canada exist? I don't know. States come and go. So the fact that Israel was created in 1948, does that mean that it'll exist 20 years from now? I don't know. You can't defend it on the grounds it has a right to exist. It will exist as long as it exists. Is it possible that the state of Palestine is replaced by the state of Israel is replaced by the state of Palestine? It is possible.
Thank you. A question on October the 7th. Who was killed in Israel? I believe there were 1,400 deaths, more or less. How many of those were military? How many civilian? How many were from the rave concert?
Okay. Here's what I think I know. I think the number, actually, the end number is 1,100. I think there were 300 and some military and another 800 civilians. That's what I believe to be the case. Some of those civilians were at or fleeing from the rave concert. Some of them were at various kibbutz, which are little Israeli outpost villages around Gaza. The question is, from the Israeli point of view, Israeli argues that all those civilians were killed by Hamas. That's possible, and has made allegations to that effect around the world. I take a kind of a skeptical position. I know that is what Israel says, that's the evidence they produce, but I also know from experience that Israel is prepared to lie when it's to their advantage. We know that police reports are often not exactly true. When a black man is killed and we find out that the police say that he was threatening the officer, and it turns out the video show that's not the case, and so on. In the case of what happened in October 7th, what I know is that we've only heard from, as you would call, from the prosecution. We haven't heard from the Hamas point of view. Now, Hamas has said that they didn't rape women, that they didn't kill the citizens. They said that they were surprised that things burst through so fast, the Israeli military, and they were surprised at the rave, so a lot of people were killed. But there's now a significant amount of evidence circulating. Al Jazeera has done a great video reportage called October 7th, which indicates that at least some of those Israeli citizens were killed by Israelis. Now, why would that be? Well, first of all, there was 24 hours of fighting back and forth shooting. People get killed, civilians get caught in the crossfire. But it's also true that the Israelis appear to have used tanks to shell houses where Hamas fighters had holed up with hostages. And also their helicopter gunships had shot on cars that were racing back towards Gaza. Some of them had Israeli citizens being taken to be captive on. So we don't know what happened. I certainly don't know what happened, but I know that there are two stories, and we've only heard any evidence really from one side. And I find it instructive that the Hamas has asked for an ICC investigation. And that leads me to believe that they think their story is a lot better than the one that's being told publicly.
Thank you, Peter. I think that's all the questions we have.
Okay, first of all, I want to thank you, Grafton, for fielding all those. I thank all the people who stuck till the end. There's still 40 people on the line. I hope that I answered some of your questions. I will be following up with an email with a recording of this, and you can respond to it with any suggestions for other webinars or topics. You can also raise questions that you think weren't dealt with adequately. One person kept on saying, I noticed in the Q&A that there was a question that was raised and I hadn't answered, and actually I felt that I had answered it earlier in the evening. I'm afraid I lost what it was now. I'm going to wind up there. It's now 9:15 in Ottawa. Thank you so much for we've almost been on there for 2 hours. I really appreciate it. And donations, we do accept donations. That would be very helpful as well. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Bye-bye.